Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Yuri Tobin. We're doing a good thing today. It's not exactly for everyone. It is for those who dab at politics, at armaments, at the international situation, and particularly for those of you who are old enough to remember about the Cuban crisis or to have heard about the Cuban crisis. Let me give you some background. Back in 1962, when Kennedy was the president of the United States and Khrushchev was the first secretary of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, America decided to deploy its missiles in Turkey. Turkey is a close neighbor, or was and still is actually, of the Soviet Union, and missiles on the Soviet Union's threshold was not a good idea for the Soviet leadership. And by way of response, by way of retaliation, в отместку, так сказать, by way of retaliation, Khrushchev spoke to President of Cuba, Fidel Castro, and they agreed that Soviet missiles would be deployed on the island of Cuba, only 87 miles from the southern border of the United States. President Kennedy, through intelligence, по разведывательным, источникам и информации соответствующей, through intelligence, got to hear about Khrushchev's intent, and also, as you will see from his speech, he had irrefutable evidence proving that Soviet warships were on the way to Cuba and carrying missiles and the associated equipment to be deployed on the island of Cuba. And so President Kennedy decided to speak to the nation, describing the situation, alerting the people to the possible dangers and consequences of that. And we will do this speech of his, this speech of President Kennedy on the Cuban crisis. It was known as Cuban crisis or the Cuban crisis. I didn't use the article to save space. Good evening, my fellow citizens. Добрый вечер, сограждане. My fellow citizens or my fellow Americans always translates as сограждане. По-русски мы не говорим сограждане американцы или американские сограждане. It's not done. Just сограждане. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Let me go back to the head of the sentence. This government translates as «эта администрация». The word government invites the translation of правительство, but in Russian, правительство is always the Council of Ministers. In the United States, the Cabinet of Ministers also exists, but it is a body subordinated to the President and to the Congress of the United States. They are known as departments, министерства, and the heads of those departments are known as secretaries. The Secretary of Defense, министр обороны. The Secretary of State – это глава государственного департамента или он же министр обороны. So when we see the word government in the American context, we always mean the administration. Итак, в соответствии с обещаниями или в соответствии с данными обещаниями. Let me call your attention to the present perfect tense has maintained. Why has maintained? Because when he was talking about this, he meant the surveillance that had been underway for some period of time before he made that speech. So he uses the present perfect, and we would be absolutely right in adding в последнее время to our translation. В последнее время наша администрация в соответствии с обещаниями продолжала или продолжает пристальное наблюдение, closest surveillance, пристальное наблюдение of the Soviet military build-up. Military build-up – это наращивание военного присутствия. Build-up – это наращивание, любое наращивание. Capability build-up, production build-up, все, что хотите, build-up. Наращивание в данном случае военного присутствия of the Soviet military build-up on the island of Cuba. The island of Cuba – это остров Куба. Штат Нью-Йорк – это the state of New York. Город Нью-Йорк – это the city of New York. The of. The state of Massachusetts. Значит, на острове Куба. Within the past week, на прошлой неделе или на прошедшей неделе, которая, видимо, только что закончилась, within the past week, unmistakable evidence, unmistakable – это безошибочное, то есть это были те доказательства, которые было сложно перепутать с чем-то другим. Unmistakable evidence has established. Again, the present perfect, because within the past week. It is a very typical use of the present perfect tense. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established. To establish is устанавливать. В данном случае доказала, вне всякого сомнения, unmistakable evidence, неопровержимые доказательства, свидетельствуют без сомнения. Ну, доказательства доказывают не очень хорошо. Неопровержимые доказательства свидетельствуют без сомнения о том, established the fact that series of offensive missile sites. Series is a very interesting noun because it sounds the same for both the singular and the plural. Series – это ряд или последовательное соединение электрических цепей. A series. А множественное число будет опять series, только, естественно, без неопределенного артикля. That a series of offensive missile sites, offensive as opposed to defensive, is наступательные ракеты. In the military, it is customary to refer to these devices as missiles, not as rockets. They are missiles, something that is launched with a military purpose in mind. A series of offensive missiles is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. Значит, целый ряд. Site – это any installation. В данном случае это пусковые площадки или пусковые объекты. a series of offensive missile sites, значит, был доказан факт, что целый ряд пусковых площадок для наступательных ракет is now in preparation. В настоящее время находится в стадии подготовки on that imprisoned island. President Kennedy always thought that Cuba under Castro and his Communist Party is a prison for the people who inhabited it, превращенный в тюрьму остров. Значит, готовятся эти площадки для наступательных ракет на этом превращенном в тюрьму острове. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability. Цель этих баз состоит ни в чем другом, как none other than, a very useful phrase. And then came none other than Mr. Smith. А затем появился никто другой, как господин Смит. The purpose in none other than to create an obstacle. Цель состоит ни в чем другом, кроме как в создании препятствий. None other than. Таким образом, цель этих баз может быть ничто другое, как provide a nuclear strike capability. Значит, цель этих баз может состоять ни в чем другом, как в создании a nuclear strike capability, способности нанесения ядерного удара against the Western Hemisphere. Hemisphere is полушарие. There are two hemispheres. Sphere – это сфера, шар,